This is the story of Edward Gein. His story unfolded in the quiet, rural landscape of Plainfield, Wisconsin. To the few who knew him, Ed seemed odd, but harmless. He did jobs for neighbors and kept to himself. On the surface, his life looked unremarkable, but the farm sat alone, and few ever visited. Inside, the house kept deep and unsettling secrets. The story of Ed Gein is more than a simple crime. It is a look into a troubled mind, a life in extreme isolation, and events that would mark his name in history. Edward Theodore Gein was born in La Crosse County, Wisconsin in 1906. On the surface, it was a typical rural beginning, but the environment within his family was isolation and a deep-seated fear from his earliest days. His father, George, was an alcoholic and often unemployed. A timid man, he was a constant target of his wife's contempt, offering no protection for his sons. His mother, Augusta, ruled the home with strict, fanatical beliefs. A fervent Lutheran, she saw the world as a cesspool of sin and held a venomous hatred for other women, viewing them as vessels of temptation. She preached to her sons, Henry and young Ed, that the world was corrupt. In 1914, she moved the family to a 160-acre farm near Plainfield, far from others. This wasn't just a new home, it was a fortress, a deliberate act of isolation to shield her boys from a world she deemed wicked. On this remote farm, Augusta controlled nearly every part of their lives. The boys left only for school. Friendships were discouraged, and any attempt to connect with peers was met with harsh punishment. As a result, Ed was shy, awkward, and bullied. He developed strange mannerisms, like laughing to himself, which only further alienated him. He was an outcast. Back home, she read harsh passages about death and divine punishment. Her lessons twisted Ed's views on religion, death, and people, fostering a morbid curiosity. He was close to Henry, who began to question their mother, but Ed remained completely devoted to Augusta. He craved her approval above all else, an obsessive attachment that would seal his dark fate. In December 1945, Augusta died after a series of strokes. She was his guide, his moral compass, his only companion. Without her, Ed was completely alone. The world she built for him fell apart. He had the emotions of a child, without friends or skills to cope. He sealed off his mother's rooms, bedroom, and parlor like shrines. He left them exactly as they were. He lived in one dirty room, surrounded by stacks of books, magazines, and junk. He neglected the farm. The property fell into ruin. He worked odd jobs, handyman, carpenter, even babysitter. He was strange but capable. He spoke about anatomy and dark pulp stories. People dismissed it as quirks. For years, life in Plainfield, Wisconsin followed a predictable, gentle rhythm. It was a small farming community where everyone knew their neighbors, and a sense of safety was taken for granted. But that quiet was a fragile thing. Slowly, unsettlingly, it began to fracture. People started to go missing, vanishing from their lives without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a growing unease that settled over the town. The first concrete crack in the town's foundation appeared on a cold winter day. December 8th, 1954, Mary Hogan, the boisterous and well-liked owner of a local tavern, suddenly disappeared. She was a fixture in Plainfield, known for her sharp wit and easy laugh. One moment she was serving drinks, the next, she was gone. Investigators found chilling evidence of violence, a dark pool of blood staining the wooden floor and a single spent .32 caliber shell casing glinting under the lights. But there was no body, no signs of a struggle, and no witnesses. With no leads to follow, the case quickly went cold. Fear began to creep through the community. This wasn't the kind of thing that happened in Plainfield. People who had never locked their doors began to turn their bolts at night. The town's innocence was lost, replaced by a quiet suspicion where every shadow seemed to hold a new, unspoken threat. 3 years later, that fear was reignited. On the morning of November 16, 1957, during the busy deer hunting season, 58-year-old Bernice Worden vanished from the hardware store she owned. Like Mary Hogan, Bernice was a respected and familiar face in town, a kind woman known to everyone. Her son Frank, who was also a deputy sheriff, stopped by the store that evening to find it empty. An eerie silence had fallen over the familiar aisles. He then made a grim discovery. The cash register was gone, and a dark trail of blood led from the main floor toward the back of the building. The scene was chillingly similar to Mary Hogan's disappearance. But this time, there was a clue. Rummaging through the day's receipts, Frank Worden found the carbon copy of the very last sale slip. Written in his mother's hand was a simple, mundane item, 1/2 gallon of antifreeze. Frank's mind immediately went to one person. He recalled that the town's odd-job man, Ed Gein, had been loitering in the store the day before, mentioning he needed antifreeze. Locals also remembered Gein's strange, unsettling behavior around Bernice, how he'd once awkwardly asked her for a date. Suddenly, the quiet, reclusive man on the outskirts of town became the focus of the investigation. Acting on his deputy's hunch, Sheriff Archley didn't hesitate. As dusk settled over the cold Wisconsin landscape, he and his officers made their way down the long, unpaved road leading to the isolated Gein property, a place most locals avoided. But Gein wasn't at his farmhouse. Instead, they found him just down the road, calmly eating dinner at a neighbor's house. When confronted, Ed was passive, almost detached. He was taken into custody without any resistance, his placid demeanor doing little to ease the officer's growing sense of dread. With Gein secured and a search warrant in hand, Sheriff Schlee and his captain returned to the farm. The house stood dark and silent against the night sky, a place of local legend. As they stepped onto the porch, they were hit by an overpowering foul odor. They pushed their way through rooms cluttered with a lifetime of debris and filth. The stench was overwhelming. They made their way to a small, attached summer kitchen. The door creaked open into pitch blackness. Schlee raised his flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow path into the oppressive dark. The light landed on a shape hanging from the ceiling. For a split second, it registered as a carcass. Then, the horrifying truth crashed down. It was the body of Bernice Worden. The sight was so profoundly monstrous that Sheriff Schlee physically recoiled, stumbling backward out of the doorway, gasping for the cold night air. Shaken but resolute, the officers immediately backed out and sealed the property. This was something far beyond a simple murder investigation. They placed a call to the state crime laboratory, knowing they needed specialized help. The Gein farm was no longer just a place of rumor and decay. The first glimpse inside confirmed their worst fears and hinted at unimaginable atrocities. It was a true house of horrors. Investigators began a systematic search of the house. What they found shocked the world. Bowls made from human skulls, chair seats upholstered with human skin, a corset made from a female torso, leggings made from human skin, mask traded from preserved faces, a lampshade of human skin, and a belt adorned with nipples. The head of Mary Hogan kept in a bag. Professionals were left ill and stunned by the depravity. In custody, Ed Gein was surprisingly calm. He readily confessed to murdering Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, speaking in a quiet, detached tone. Investigators were stunned by his placid demeanor, as he recounted the details without apparent remorse. He also admitted to dozens of nocturnal visits to local cemeteries, which he described as being in a daze. He explained that after his mother's death, he was overwhelmed by a twisted desire to become a woman, exhuming bodies of women who resembled her. A court-ordered evaluation diagnosed him with schizophrenia. Deemed legally insane and unable to comprehend the charges, he was found unfit to stand trial. Instead of prison, Gein was committed to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where for a decade he was reportedly a model patient. By 1968, doctors deemed him competent. In a two-part trial for Bernice Worden's murder, a jury first found him factually guilty. However, the judge then ruled him not guilty by reason of insanity, based on the original psychiatric findings from over a decade earlier. He returned to state psychiatric care, spending his remaining years at the Mendota Mental Health Institute. Ed Gein died of respiratory failure in 1984 at age 77. His quiet end was a stark contrast to his violent legacy, and he was buried in Plainfield next to the mother he so disturbingly idolized. But Gein's story morphed into modern myth. It directly inspired Robert Bloch's novel Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock's film, cementing the idea of the killer next door. Echoes of his crimes appeared in characters like Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, forever changing horror. Amidst the sensationalism, it is crucial to remember the real victims. Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan lost their lives. For the families whose loved ones' graves were desecrated, the violation brought a lasting trauma to the small community of Plainfield. The story is a cautionary tale about profound isolation and untreated mental illness. Gein's farmhouse burned to the ground in 1958, but the lesson remains. We must look closer, listen better, and never underestimate the darkness that can fester in silence. Come back for more chills, haunts, murder, and mystery. Share this video with family and friends. Please like and subscribe.